This segment brought to you by Kansas Soybean Commission. Progress powered by Kansas farmers. And here we are again. I'm Frank.
I'm still Deb.
And this is still around Kansas. They are actually
Not canceled yet.
Yeah, here we are. Hey, Kansas also has a reputation for being a wild and woolly state back in the old cowboy days.
Yes.
And I mean, it was deserving of its reputation.
It was.
Because there were a lot of cow towns once the Chisholm Trail got up here, and there were a couple other trails that came up. By the time they got to Kansas and to the railheads, the cowboys were ready to just whoop it up and party. And that's all true. And some of these towns were just really something else. And most people have heard of Dodge City, where Matt Dillon was. Not really. But there was Dodge City, and there was Abilene. Newton, Kansas was also one of the railheads and a wild and woolly town. But I discovered another one, Caldwell, Kansas.
I think I had an ancestor who was sheriff there.
Well, you're going to hear in the story that I'm going to do that sheriffs and marshals didn't last very long in Caldwell, Kansas.
No, they did not.
Yeah. And anyway, the people of Caldwell have done something very, very interesting with their town. And I don't want to get ahead of the story, but you can go to Caldwell and you will hear talking tombstones.
Love it.
Yeah. So anyway, let's take a look. This is a Kansas profile by Ron Wilson, director of the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development at Kansas State University. If only those tombstones could talk. Have you ever had that thought while visiting a cemetery? Well, today we'll meet a rural community which is giving a voice to fascinating histories of the past. Karen Sturm is tourism coordinator for the Chamber of Commerce in Caldwell. This is a volunteer position, as was her time spent as president of the local historical society. Caldwell is located near the Oklahoma border. It played a significant role in the 1893 Cherokee Strip land rush into Indian Territory, now Oklahoma. In 1990, the community of Caldwell began a 3-year process to prepare for the centennial of the land rush. Karen stepped in to help with this celebration and learned much more about the fascinating history of Caldwell. Caldwell has been nicknamed the Border Queen, positioned as it was along the Oklahoma line. It was a wild, wide-open cow town in the days of the cattle drives along the Chisholm Trail. Being a lawman in Caldwell was nearly impossible. For example, between 1879 and 1885, the town went through 16 marshals. Violence was rampant. Outlaws were buried in Caldwell's Boot Hill, and a cemetery was begun northwest of town. As volunteers prepared for the land rush centennial in 1993, they wanted to find an engaging way to share the fascinating true stories of people from Caldwell's past. They thought about a cemetery tour, then thought of having people in period costumes who would tell the stories in person while depicting the deceased. The activity was so popular, it has continued ever since. Talking Tombstones is the name of this program, consisting of volunteers in costume sharing their stories at the cemetery. For example, a cowboy with a rifle stood next to his gravestone and told of being killed in a cow camp shootout. Other volunteers might depict a successful lady of the evening, an early-day lawman who was shot in the line of duty, the common-law wife of a man who was hung at the stockyards, or a pioneer undertaker. Karen herself portrays the widow of Caldwell's first marshal. This has become our most requested activity, Karen said. It's performed for bus tours, school groups, and more. That's a creative idea for a rural community like Caldwell, population 1,264 people. More than 20 historical markers marked the downtown streets, describing historic buildings and true stories of wild shootouts and more. These signs are entirely funded by private donations and local businesses. In 1995, the town erected giant steel silhouettes south of town depicting a longhorn cattle drive of yesteryear. In 2002, the town's old opera house was going to be condemned and razed. The Historical Society bought the building for the back taxes, Karen said. In 4 years, the opera house was beautifully restored. It hosts various community events. Near the opera house, a beautiful metal arch on 2 massive limestone pillars were built in 2011. All these activities are conducted by volunteers. Our local businesses have been very supportive of letting people take time to do these things, Karen said. So, anyway, talking Tombstones, Caldwell, Kansas, sounds like an interesting place around Kansas. Fort Wallace stood on the frontier in the midst of the Plains Indians Wars on a major stage route and rail line. Beside the 1865 stagecoach station, a modern museum with thousands of artifacts tell that story, like the fossil of a 40-foot plesiosaur is suspended from the ceiling. Located on Highway 40 midway between Hayes and Colorado Springs, the Fort Wallace Museum is as welcome a sight today as the fort itself in the 1860s. Discover the fighting sport in the West.